Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Thomas K. Arnold. I'm the publisher and editorial director of Home Media Magazine, which is a home entertainment trade publication and website. I've been in this business, kind of the merger of technology and entertainment for over 25 years, so I consider myself a grizzled veteran. I'm kind of a regular speaker here at Digital Hollywood, but I was asked to moderate, which I haven't done for a long time, not since our own convention has ended. So back up here behind the dais and would like to extend a hearty welcome to everybody. We have a great topic. I love the title of our panel. It's the OTT Ultimate TV, the OTT cross-platform multi-screen experience navigated by set-top, mobile device, or console, which basically sums up the whole OTT universe right now. OTT, of course, is over-the-top transmission, which is the hottest, I'm pretty much safe in saying it is the hottest trend in entertainment these days. Just this morning, the Digital Entertainment Group released numbers that showed that for the first time, over-the-top streaming, chiefly through Netflix and Amazon Prime, but also, all the other guys lumped in, exceeded $1 billion for the first time in the first quarter of this year. And it is now only about 15% behind Blu-ray disc and DVD sales. So subscription streaming is rapidly becoming the preferred way that people watch movies on demand at home and other TV shows. And we have a lot to discuss about this. What's driving it and how people are using it and what we can do to improve the experience. We have a huge panel tonight, or this afternoon. The usual crew that we were here in Las Vegas, we were here last year, and I imagine we'll be here again in the fall. We have Dana Forte is Vice President of Product Management for Vubiquity. He is sitting in for Mr. Gupta, who couldn't make it, so welcome.
Thank you.
Then we have Mike Earl, CEO and founder of AIO TV. Robin Wilson, VP of Business Development for Nagra. Ty Roberts, co-founder and chief strategy officer of Gracenote. Candace Edwards, a newcomer to our panel, senior vice president of strategy and business development for Digiflare. Andrew Morton, vice president of Entone, and Sean Besser, head of platform for Peel. I'd like to get everybody involved in the discussion, and if you could all give us about a brief introduction about who you are and where you fit in on the OTT food chain. We'll start with Dana right here.
Absolutely. Dana Forte, I work with Vubiquity. We're a large provider of premium content services. We have two major lines of business, one being live. We power over 400 live channels to our plant. We power those channels directly into cable operators' head-ends for delivery to set-top box, as well as over-the-top or connected devices. We also are the largest provider of on-demand services as well. We service over 370 content providers and deliver that content to over 550 distributors. We service 37 countries and 17 languages. We do that for the smallest cable operators in the U.S. all the way up to Comcast and a lot of OTT retailers as well.
Great.
I'm Mike Earl. I'm the CEO of AOTV. We're a Denver-based company, about 6 years old. We build a platform, set of tools designed for MVPDs and the content owner community to put all the pieces and parts on the table that'll allow them to authenticate users to content, normalize the metadata that's coming out, all these multiple sources of content to the consumer, and really those back office tool sets that will enable new content creation experiences across pretty much any device that the consumer has or a device that the operator themselves may want to place in the home. We'll have a good discussion today.
So I'm Robin Wilson from Nagra. I do business development for Nagra. We do content protection, DRM, conditional access. We also do multi-screen middleware, and sometimes we do the user experience, user interface as well. And we have to glue together the old and the new in many instances from broadcasters like Dish, who we do their satellite. We're also doing Dish TV. There's hybrid applications where the different inputs from OTT and broadcast are shared, and there's a lot of challenges on the metadata side, combining between all these different disparate platforms.
I'm Ty Roberts, co-founder and CSO of Gracenote. Gracenote is part of the Tribune family. We're a large metadata and services company around media. We have television guide information and VOD information globally. I think we have like 4,000 customers for that. It's quite a big operation. On the music side, we provide all the basic metadata and the data used to playlist and create radio channels and music experiences for iTunes and Spotify and a good deal of music services. And then lastly, we do voice enhancements for the automotive business. So in the car, when you speak to your car stereo to play music, it usually involves our technology or our data, and I think we're in 65 million cars. So about 1,500 people in the company.
Hello, thanks for coming, everybody. My name is Candace Edwards. I serve as the SVP of Strategy and Corporate Business Development for Digiflare. We're a platform product and services company that enables TV everywhere and OTT solutions and content experiences across every device. We're headquartered in Toronto, Canada, and some of our customers include Univision, Bell, Disney, Charter, and the largest publishers and broadcasters in North America.
Andrew Morton, Vice President Broadband TV for Entone. Entone is originally a video on demand server company. We've evolved into platforms for connected TV. We have a very large line of set-top box for IPTV, cable, and integrated over-the-top delivery for service providers. We currently have roughly 150 global service providers we call customers today, which includes some of the larger ones in Europe, US, and Latin America. I'm responsible for all of our broadband TV platforms as we see a shift from traditional linear television to over-the-top managed by broadband providers. And really, Entone really fits very well within the panel today as somebody would integrate many of the solutions as my co-panelists.
And lastly, Sean Besser here. Peel is the largest remote control company in the world, despite not making any remote controls. So there's two things we're focused on in terms of innovating the remote control, which we think is the most antiquated piece of technology most people have in their home. The first is we get it connected to the internet. By connecting it to the internet, it lets your remote become smart, and it lets it help you find what to watch better by being personalized, by giving you recommendations, by telling you what's popular, what your friends are watching, etc. There's a bunch of functionality you can unlock in the remote by getting it connected to the internet. The second thing we're doing is getting rid of it. 85% of Americans have a smart device in their hands when they're watching TV, and there's no reason that can't also be a remote control. So what we focused on doing is building our remote functionality directly into those devices so that can be your remote control. So we're preloaded for the last 2 years on every Samsung mobile device in the world, every HTC device, every LG device, every Vodafone device. A bunch of different devices come with our app and our remote control technology built into it. So your Samsung phone is also a remote control when you buy it out of the store.
Yeah, I wish you'd had Apple, because that's one of my pet peeves. You know, I'm one of those guys who, where's the remote?
So do we. We actually do have an app on the iPhone, but there's no infrared technology built into it, so it has to work. You have to have an internet-connected set-top box and or television in order for it to work, which most people in this room probably do, so it would work for you. But it doesn't work at quite the same scale that it'll work on an Android device, because we've built an infrared blaster directly into those devices, which is what what all remotes tend to have.
Hey, Sean, I got it on my iPhone. It
Good.
actually does work.
There we go.
But it's funny, because that's one thing that and everybody who I've talked to would love to use their smartphone, as a control. And it's funny, the reason we want that is if you get down to the two basic needs that I think have driven consumer habits throughout the history of home entertainment, it's cheap and easy. I already have a smartphone, so it's cheap and it's easy. I just press a button. And I think cheap and easy is also one of the prime reasons we've seen OTT emerge as just such a giant player. I mean, when Netflix came out with the proposition that for under $10 you can watch, pretty much any movie and TV show you want from the comfort of your couch, what could be easier and what could be cheaper? But I wanted to get your views on OTT is a lot more than Netflix, and the potential is also, way beyond simply, streaming Joyride 3 and old movies and things like that. I mean, the business is evolving as we speak toward original content and other aspects. What do you think is really driving the OTT juggernaut? And Candace, let me start with you on that.
Sure. I mean, I think it's pretty simple. It's choice and the proliferation of connected devices. I think when you look at folks that are indexing on viewing any type of video with the advent of YouTube and all of the MCNs with sort of the beginnings of cat videos 5 years ago that have turned into somewhat compelling user-generated content. Specifically, the millennials, they're going straight to their mobile devices, and they're not even subscribing to traditional MVPDs or MSOs. So the notion of having choice and choice of the kind of content that you as a particular consumer want to consume versus having a cadre of 100 to 500 channels that are really noise when you're only watching 5%. I think the MVPDs and MSOs and Dish being sort of one of the pioneers in launching Sling TV, and obviously most of us are aware of the others to come, they're sort of hedging their bets, and they're looking at the sunsetting subscribership they have for traditional cable and satellite content and moving towards a model where they can capture an audience that will never go there and offer them services that are akin to what they're willing to pay for.
Anyone else?
I think one of the big areas, the big changes is coming is, yes, there's now everything is available. Finding the right thing is going to become very important, and having technology that helps you, not just search-driven, where you kind of need to know what you're looking for, but can recommend things to you in an intelligent way. And I love the idea of the phone being the remote control, because this tells me who's there in the living room and helps personalize what I'm giving you choices to that person. If it's just a TV set on a wall, I don't know who's sitting in front of it necessarily, and then I'm going to give you a mix of everything that's been in that household, which my house could be my 15-year-old son's things versus my wife versus me. So it really is helpful to have some, I don't want personally identifiable information, I just want to know what kind of person is there so that I can get really good stuff to you. And I think that's the future, is automatically helping build the channel of you so that you just turn it on and you see the stuff that you want.
And largely echoing Ty, I believe OTT's not taking off as quickly as people predicted or hoping for or wish is because it's hard today. Like, with the exception of Netflix, which is pretty ubiquitously available, if you want to cut the cord, it's hard to put together a package of content that's going to satisfy your needs. And even if you do that, it's going to be hard to sort of seamlessly switch between them. If you want to go from watching Orange is the New Black to your next show being something on the ESPN app, to the next thing being something on HBO, it takes probably 10 plus clicks on average to get in and out of each app or each input to be able to watch that. And people are lazy. People want things delivered to them fairly seamlessly. And so as these integrations start happening and it becomes easier to discover in one medium and then control it on another pretty quickly without having to think about it, that's how it's going to scale. Because on Sunday night, I just want to watch Mad Men. I don't want to think about, all right, which app do I have to watch Mad Men in? Which input does my TV have to be on? How is it getting to me? I don't give a shit. I just want to watch Mad Men. And companies, whether it's Peel or anybody else, have to make that super easy for it to really take off at scale.
You know, I think if you go back to rewind to when cable had its genesis, and aside from signal quality and predictability and, the fact that it just worked without an antenna anymore, the big value that continued down the road for cable was aggregation. And that couldn't be any more true today with the growing number of sources of content that are coming at a consumer, to the point that the panel's already made here today. The aggregation is key here, and the curation of that content through that aggregation, so you can actually find what you want, do less searching, spend more time watching. That's where the platforms that we're all working on are headed towards, trying to make some sanity out of the amount of content that's coming at a consumer, and it's only going to accelerate. So it's about aggregation and curation.
I'm dealing with an issue right now called disaggregation, unfortunately. I guess I'm showing the site I might be on, but we're on an FCC panel trying to decide on the future of security and openness. And the operators, the MVPDs, pretty much all, except maybe perhaps Google Fiber, want their apps to be siloed. And I've been trying to point out, be careful for what you wish for, because we may end up in a 500 app world and nothing on, just like the 500 channel world that we had a few years ago. Now, some of the apps are not siloed, and that's a decision the owners of the apps make, but a lot of them are, and that's not just video. Video is a big problem, the switching, but metadata is also siloed. So there's no cross-app search in many cases, and that becomes a real pain. 500 apps and having to switch apps and not be able to search between them is not going to be fun.
Yeah. Well, it does seem that the whole, the biggest enemy that home entertainment, has faced since the on-demand entertainment business was born with video cassette in 1978 really has been silos. I mean, the industry, the home video industry began with the format war.
Right. Format is a silo. That was the first silo.
Yeah, I mean, the beta was a siloed format, and even now in the digital world, we've got Ultraviolet, which is for the studios, but each one has their own website for it to go in, and then just when they get everything together and have a uniform area, Disney comes out with Disney Movies Anywhere and says, no, we won't play ball with you guys. And you're right. I think our patience has worn thin, that we don't want to spend a lot of time looking for stuff, which is why search and discovery, and correct me if I'm wrong, is probably the biggest challenge we have in this business.
It is. It also trying to have consumers who just want access to everything everywhere at all times, understanding windowing systems where like this is available this week, and like, I'm on Comcast, watch until 31st of March. I'm like, well, wait a minute, what's happening on the 31st of March? This show came out a year ago while it's going into some other distribution channel. So the reality is that concept is really foreign to, especially the younger generation now. They just don't, my son at 15, like, it's either there or it isn't. If it isn't there, I'll watch something else, and so the reality is that system, which I realize helps the entertainment industry extract maximum value, is somewhat challenging in a world where it's anywhere, anytime, everything. And that's kind of the future 10 years from now.
It's all about presentation, Larry. We have deployments now globally where the recommendation engine is key to the experience because the consumers are looking for things. And they actually brought in third parties that had algorithms written around an experience. Initially, a lot of these recommendation engines were written around advertising models, but now it's more about consumer engagement. When you look at you asked what OTT is about, what is the definition of OTT? It's content, whether it be video, audio, or something else. Nowadays, home cameras, anything over somebody else's network, where the network operator really sees no revenue from that. Now, anybody delivering that kind of service, if they're going to be relevant, they've got to have a real easy way for consumers to engage. Otherwise, they're going to lose them because they're lost in an ocean. And what I'm finding now is, for example, one deployment we have in South America, they are now offering a recommendation engine for every single thing that's put out there. And they're also doing smart DVR as the next generation for delivery. So the consumer always has stuff recorded from linear, and then they've also got things they can pull from YouTube, Netflix, and some local OTT applications that we've never heard of here in the States.
I found it interesting that you brought, and it happens through this whole, few days here, a few weeks ago at NAB, where the terms search and discovery are thrown together in almost every case. Mm-hmm. And it's gotten so commonplace that search and discovery, for a lot of folks, when you're sitting at the front of this, assuming it's the same thing. And we believe it's wildly different.
Yeah.
We actually track on our platform, we want to see search instances go down, which means you're doing the right job of curating the right content and making those recommendations and making it easy for the consumer to find what they want without having to have a place to start. And that's where search starts. You've got an idea, you go look for something specific. That trend should be going down with the amount of content that's coming at us.
Yeah, that's a good point. At Ubiquity, we actually, through the data we send to cable providers, actually power many of the cable experiences you see on the screen. I'm not necessarily proud of that fact because that caused users to actually find other means for navigating content. Simply navigating a tree of content by genre is not enough. I think the next parallel up, as you described, is really search. But I think the reason why OTT has really taken a grasp is that it's the inquisitive nature of human beings in discovering things that you didn't even know you might want to watch. So not just necessarily searching for it, but finding relations between contents that maybe didn't exist before. And I think the reason why you see MVPDs not being able to adapt as quickly is because they have these large plant infrastructure that are very tough for them to upgrade. They're not as quickly able to move on a dime as you see, for example, like a Netflix going from physical to digital and cannibalizing their own business. The cable operators would love to do the same, but it's very cost prohibitive for them to do that as well.
Mm-hmm. It's also the speed of the content. I mean, somebody posts something on YouTube, it's live potentially in 15 seconds. And so on large cable networks, that's not really possible unless it's like actual live broadcast. Then it is live. But if you want to get a file up on a network and syndicate it around to all the different head ends, it could take a week. So the reality is that is different for the consumption models for some people. People are really looking for immediate information, and the internet is powering a lot of that. People are finding this on these new outlets.
What advances are we seeing in discovery? And by that I mean, I think with discovery more than anything, it's important to be right. In other words, if you're going to go on, let's say Netflix, for example, and you watch a movie you like a lot, that it recommends 2 other movies for you, they better be right on and you better like them. How do you, what are the next steps in ensuring that happens? How can we make discovery even better?
Metadata.
accurate use-based patterns. And I think it's all about behavior. You know, it's about engagement. And if you continue to go back to the consumer and give them a passive experience, then you've got them. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they're just going to move on. They're going to go off the reservation, do something else. You know, Netflix is one that we keep talking about as I think the big shining example. And it's really Netflix and kind of everybody else that we see in usage base. I mean, Netflix is what, they're sitting at 67 million subscribers today, roughly. So with those kind of numbers for growth, there's nobody that comes close to that for an OTT application today. And with the exception, of course, YouTube, which has an unconscionable number of subscribers. Right?
But YouTube doesn't really do recommendation. If you say search for something, they'll give you 30 videos of the same thing. It's search.
Exactly.
I think the biggest thing that's out there, so we work in music, and music is a little bit ahead on the recommendation front because of the Pandoras and the other kind of things that are out there. So the state of the art there will be applied to television, which is I need to know who the person is, okay, who am I talking to, and then you look at their usage pattern across the entire week. What do they do in the morning? What do they do when they come home? What do they do on their way? And then you try to characterize them as their areas of interest during those times. So like for music, if you're in the morning, go to the gym, you're going to listen to a very specific type of music at the gym, which might be completely different than what you listen to on Friday night when you're cooking dinner with your wife. So the reality is video is a lot like that too. Okay, Sunday nights I'm watching, I'm watching Mad Men with my wife. I watch a show that fits the both of us. But Saturday nights, she's out and I'm able to watch some more action-adventure stuff that I like. And so being able to understand the people and what they're consuming, I think, is going to be critical. And then trying to understand in the idea of introducing new content to them, how adventuresome they are, and adventuresome in which way. Am I adventuresome in the kind of genre of things I like, or do I like foreign films, or do I like, things that are driven by, action or stars? So trying to figure out what really turns them on in terms of the things they want. That's kind of the state of the art. And I don't know anyone who's really deployed something quite at that level yet, but we have all the data for that, and we're starting to see a lot of different companies come to us and ask to use it in this way. So I think in the next couple of years, you'll see some really exciting stuff in that area.
I think one of the things that's key is data, the big data involved in driving the personalization that everybody wants on these devices, is also tying into the social graph, psychographic data, and machine learning technologies. So having all the metadata and the derivative data that can sort of categorize content is one thing, but being able to constantly track or A/B or multivariate test these users, which Netflix and Hulu Plus are doing to us on a daily basis, so that you can test things that we do at DigiFlare very well, simple user interfaces. How big is the button for our PBS client? It needs to be really big for kids because they like that kind of an interface. So we'll test pixels and size and ratios. What kind of tiling are you using? So that's not necessarily driving recommendation, but it's driving the user experience. And so the longer you can lasso that customer, subscriber, audience member into your content, the more long-term of a relationship you'll have with them.
It was really interesting a few weeks ago at NAB. If I walked away from that show with one recurring theme, look, there was some great technology there, a ton of great UIs, a ton of great platforms that kind of enable in different ways all the things we're talking about here, but right down to the content owner community themselves. And at Gracenote has to feel this every day, is that there's no really good standard for metadata, the framing and format of that metadata, the quality of it. These guys have to take that in and try and solve that. The problem is there's so many sources of content that are going around the traditional distribution model, and they continue to change every day, where the quality and the structure of that metadata is suspect in a lot of cases. You can't do good search, discovery, recommendation, and provide the experiences we're talking here if the metadata tied to the content is all over the map.
Yeah, it's a good point. Ubiquity, we actually source, I mentioned, from over 370 content sources. And one of the main values we provide to distributors today is we actually do acquire the metadata. We normalize that metadata. And I think we're stretching ourselves now to be able to provide linkages to other data sources, knowing that our metadata may not be enough. So, for example, provide linkages to Gracenote data, Rotten Tomatoes data that actually help them pull in external sources of information to create a very rich and compelling experience.
It's critical for over-the-top monetizing. We haven't really talked about monetizing this stuff. And one of the problems you have, just even on YouTube. So if your video's on there, it could be like really popular. It could have 40 million views, but it has really poor tagging. You will just get run-of-the-house ads from YouTube. YouTube doesn't know what it is. They run junk, essentially, because they don't know what it is. Ford is like, I'm not buying an ad on something I don't know what it is. So that tagging directly impacts the revenues for these things. And so, yeah, it might be a really cool cat video, and it's really popular, but you didn't even tag it with the word cat. You tag it with the word Sam, the name of the cat. That's not going to get you what you want. And so the reality is that once you go off I'll call it, in the professional world, it's pretty good, but once we go into the internet world, it goes completely out of control. and also open tagging models where people can just put any word they want associated with it. Okay, I call it football, you call it soccer. All right, well, we just divided the world like in a half right there. You know, like half the videos won't show up in the search. So that stuff is really a big problem, and it works well for search in some ways, but it doesn't work well in the advertising world. So that's one of the big challenges for internet video.
You know, along those lines, you know, you talked about, you know, data coming from all over the place, all different sources. You know, it is important, while everybody knows about the big players, you know, in OTT, Netflix and Amazon Prime, we hear about HBO and Sony, and there's a lot of independents jumping in. Lionsgate is starting 2 channels, Cinedigm, and then there's real tiny niche players too. First of all, how do you compete against a Netflix, which for $10 a month, you know, gives you whatever you want? And how do you monetize your OTT, you know, in the face of such cheap, ubiquitous competition?
I think you don't compete with them. So the notion of how cable started as a narrowcast model, you know, the Food Network and the Race Car Network or whatever it happens to be, you launch an OTT service that is curated and programmed for an audience that already exists. So TAP TV is a good example of that. John Klein from CNN, working with thought leaders in the industry that already have a following, whether you like her or not, let's say the Sarah Palin channel. Glenn Beck is a great example of that. So the idea, anyone can have an OTT offering as long as you already have an audience. And then metadata and big data really can drive the discovery of that channel, if you will, with an audience that may have a propensity or tendency to like that kind of a content. So I think there's a lot of opportunity with an OTT, but you have to do it right, and you can't just compete with Amazon Instant Video and Netflix unless you've got major coin. I mean, they're spending $10 million an episode on House of Cards, or maybe it's $5 million an episode, I'm not quite sure, but it's massive real Hollywood money. So I think you just need to be purposeful when you as a content programmer and a publisher are deciding to launch these kind of solutions. I think all of us have the platforms to support them and enable it. It's whether or not you as the customer will be successful.
Certainly have to agree with Candace. What I hear from broadband operators who are trying to figure out how to deploy broadband TV, which is, you know, what I call over-the-top video managed by a broadband provider. So this would be MSOs, and telcos, you know, traditional, you know, line carriers that have fiber networks, cable networks. They recognize if you can't beat them, you better join them. There's got to be a way to attract consumers back to their service, and Netflix seems to be a nice thing to hang on their shingle to be able to do that. Otherwise, they have a big problem being appealing to anybody that's under 70, right? Everybody has Netflix. And I always say the same thing about Netflix whenever I see a new OTT player come up. If you want to copy their model, you're going to have to start with $500 million. It's a very expensive thing to get started with today. They grew the right way, they were in the right place at the right time, and it's a very, very good service and very intelligently put together. I see other OTT vendors we have integration with Netflix on our platform, we have integration with YouTube and people like that. Third-party OTT people that we're working with that we bring into our platform like the idea of having Netflix there because it's going to bring eyeballs to that integrated platform next to Netflix. So if they sell a premium VOD store, for example, you know, perhaps powered by Ubiquity in some cases, having a Netflix there is a positive thing because consumers are going to look at that, and then when they want a premium title, which they'll pay for, then they'll go to the premium VOD channel. Everything else, which there isn't a lot of money in, they'll go to Netflix. And it's a nice thing to have as a sidecar to your service.
One of the issues that we see, because we have to deal with a lot of the plumbing and the user side particularly, is different apps. Again, so on a desktop, or Mac or whatever, there's a move towards doing things in browsers, not exclusively, but there's standards, EME and others you could at least have a common denominator, the browser, which gets a large part of the population. But when we move to tablets or smartphones, there's nobody wants to do it in the browser. They are seriously, we're into the siloed app again, and the video plumbing is bad enough. But to make these niche programmers, or at least initially programmers, searchable, discoverable, we need a federated search capability, which is possibly a third-party device, or maybe from your company to go above that. But
some are doing it. I mean, Roku has this, and some.
So you've got a kind of they've got their own silo which is the Roku box.
Right.
which is a
But you can
silo.
only
in-
search across all the stuff that's in there for the people who participate in the search, which not everyone does, but.
Yeah, so there's silos within silos, and some of them are broadening, but it's still a big challenge to be found.
And if you look at the Amazon product, you can search there, but it always lists Amazon first, even if you have a free option.
And we're doing that at Peel as well. One of our core beliefs is universal search, and we believe that we've been preloaded on 300 million devices and had about half of those, about 140, 150 million people activate on them, and everybody has a different use case, and that's something that we just need to keep in mind. Is what I'm going to be searching for is different than what you're going to be searching for, and different than what you want. And so what we're really focused on is aggregating the universe of content that's available to you, whether it's linear, whether it's on demand, whether it's VOD, whether it's on your DVR. We and other companies need to focus on doing that and then getting people into those. And going back to your question about OTT, the new providers, from our perspective, we don't care how many there are because we're just going to integrate them, index them, and surface them to users. But I think we're going to see a constant sort of ebb and flow of providers coming into this space, and people are just going to keep dying and dying and dying because what they're going to realize is, to your point, is you need a lot of money to launch it, and then it takes a lot of money to keep it running successfully in a world where you have to make money off of it. Over the last 20, 30 years, most people in the content direct distribution game to the consumer have used it as a loss leader. Walmart sold DVDs at a loss to get people in the store to buy another $40 worth of crap. Comcast even often would sell it at break even or at a loss to get you to be buying their data or other services. And in a world where you're just going online, grabbing what you want and leaving, it's going to be tough to operate content-based businesses.
Well, I think that's the point. I mean, the elephant in the room for most of the discussions this week around anything related to this topic is that there's a battle for the end subscriber and who controls that. There's plenty of content out there. There's plenty of platform and technology out there to get the content reliably to the consumer. There's still a squabble over who feels they are in control of that subscriber. And old business models, in this case, are so entrenched, it's going to be a slow process, even though we're starting to see cracks in it. It's going to be a slow process to see this change where the consumer benefits from kind of getting the hair off the table with the existing rights that are out there. So we have a period of time where consumers are just frustrated right now to the point. Windowing, as a consumer, I don't want to know. I don't care to know. I just want to know, where did my show go? And until that starts to go away, you're going to see a lot of niche content players being able to reach directly to the consumer where it's consistent. They can find their shows and they're not going to go away. And I think that's led somewhat to the emergence of where Netflix is going with their original programming. They have control of it. They've purchased it. They have the rights. They understand what's there. And the consumer has a consistent experience and know where to find their content. So, I mean, the big elephant is this. We have a set of business models that are entrenched for decades now around multi-channel bundling, and those will start to peel off a little bit at a time. But until they do, the biggest challenge this whole OTT thing has in terms of growth is getting rid of the old models.
Right.
I do also think there's some really interesting opportunities, even for domestic players with international content. There's huge groups here in the United States, so Latin American content is huge, and there's opportunities. If you want to get need something unique, that's one area you can look to, which is specialize in a specific region and bring that stuff here, or go to some other region in the world where they don't have already a lock on the play on it and do something new. So there's people bringing like global extreme sports to the United States, which is pretty interesting. Obviously, there's Latin American content, there's Chinese content that's coming here, and these companies that are out there with the content are looking for partners because they're like a Chinese company and they don't have, so there's a lot of opportunity in that, and I've met a few people here at the show who are kind of here looking for partners to help them, and that's probably a good business opportunity for people.
Our client, in that vein, Ty, our client Univision, I mean, they're a great example, at least on the linear broadcast side, of having a joint venture with Telemundo. So they bring what is ostensibly Spanish language content to the bicultural Latino market in the U.S., and then, oh, by the way, Digiflare powers all their TV Everywhere solutions on every connected device. So that's a really good sort of narrowcast, to use an old term, example. Also, companies like Drama Fever, we're bringing Korean, I call them telenovelas because I'm half Korean, but they're Korean teledramas that are about 100 episodes in length. You watch them linearly, or serially rather, but they're not good for Netflix because once you get to the end of the story, you're done. It's not a a repeatable kind of an asset. So having a $5.99 subscription to Drama Fever and getting the full catalog of not only Korean telenovelas, but from largely every country in the world, and it's a global OTT service, is of great value. And so they're doing awesome from a revenue perspective. And then you couple that with your a la carte Sling TV or Verizon, whatever they're calling their a la carte offering, or wherever you're getting sort of your premium television programming with a Hulu Plus and a Netflix, you're still probably under your $150 triple threat subscription with DirecTV or Time Warner. Soon, though, that disposable income will shrink because you'll find more content that you like, and you'll keep adding the a la carte model, and all of a sudden you're at $250 a month, and the consumer is the one who suffers. So I think we're at an inflection point where it's sort of the Wild West, and so if you're in the business of creating channels, this is a great opportunity. It's like when YouTube would give away those millions of dollars to Hollywood, and they all knew they were just going to run that money out. It wasn't going to turn into anything. And so I kind of feel like it's a bit of a pyramid scheme. But that said, I think if you're organized correctly and you've got the right platform technology to deliver a compelling experience to the audience, which is all of us at home, you're likely to have a good chance at standing.
Well, let me ask you, we talked about, what it's going to take for small players to survive and to make it in the business. What about the biggest player, Netflix? Is it sustainable? And the reason I ask is, they built a business model about tons of content that they're giving away for under $10 a month. And now they're spending huge amounts of money on original content to the point where studios in Hollywood are even starting to cannibalize their own home video divisions by, hey, yeah, we're going to put it out on Netflix ahead of disc because we can make more money. And Netflix, of course, right now is fueling all this, through expanding in Europe and elsewhere around the world. So it keeps, make money in a new territory, spend it on original content. Do you see this ending sometime? Will they run out of an audience?
I don't think they'll run out of an audience, but they aren't going to be able to create all the content in the world, so that's not going to happen. They've been very lucky to have some great shows. They've done a great job of that, but there's still a worldwide global content creation business, which will, I think, charge more for some of those audiences to bring there. So I think it'll be some imbalance. They are getting enough mass that's making other people have a hard time competing with them.
Right.
But the reality is, I don't think it's necessarily ultimately bad for the content industry. I think it's a little bit challenging now because we're in that in-between time. But in the future, I think he who owns the content that people want to watch is king. And there's also, interestingly enough, in Netflix, not really a promotional mechanism to expose people to new shows. So actually how people find out about shows on Netflix is they see promos on television and on VOD content, and then they find out that they can go see the rest of it on Netflix. So like there's a mechanism there, it's still not quite right. Like Netflix doesn't have like a here's what's coming channel that really works. So that's an interesting area too, leaving opportunity for other people to introduce shows.
At the end of the day, there's only so many nickels to go around here, and if you start looking at, where this whole content community had been even a decade ago, content was created, it was sold to a distributor, the distributor marked it up and made their money. There's now all these other pieces and parts and companies in the middle of that trying to pull a piece of that away. There's only so much you can get from a subscriber, and there's only so many pieces you can shave that dollar into before it starts to fall apart. So with Netflix's model, I'll give you a relevant example that I think is going to be a bit of a trend. We're working with a tier 1 operator here in the US that is a traditional MVPD. They made their money the way I just mentioned. Their next generation platform is going to be free to consumer. They're not going to try and monetize it at all. They're trying to bring the value of the aggregation and the pipe that they've built into the house, and they're going to let the content guys go. It's a low margin business becoming a lower margin business every day. And if you're Netflix saying, well, unless I'm going to try and drive that subscription up higher and higher and higher and produce or buy a lot of this original programming, you can't make money aggregating somebody else's content anymore the way you used to. So the models have to change, and I think people are starting to soften up to the fact, or at least come to the realization that this stuff's going to make it to the consumer without them. How do I play a part in the chain and show value and still have a business at the end of the day? And Netflix has got to watch for that too.
Yeah, Mike's definitely right in that point. We actually announced last fall an deployment with TIM Brazil, Telecom Italia Mobile. Owns a very large operator in Brazil. They have 80 million subscribers in mobile, and they have a fiber network that crosses 8 million customers. So, large operator. They, in their fiber network, decided they absolutely had to get fiber customers, terrestrial fiber customers. There's a lot of what we call MDU in our business, which is multi-tenant, multi-dwelling units. Those are apartment buildings. literally millions of homes that they pass in Rio and Sao Paulo and some other smaller cities. They chose to completely avoid a traditional pay TV service as a means to attract people to their broadband service. They recognized that the costs to enter were very high. They were really going to spend what could equate to billions of dollars to compete with very well-established players, the equivalent of what we have in DirecTV here in the United States, the equivalent to what we have in people like Comcast or Cox. Those kind of competitors exist there. They recognize that though the kind of dollars they would need to spend just didn't make sense, because they also recognize on the other side of all of that investment, the consumer has already decided they're going to do some different things. Netflix was certainly an appetizer to a whole slew of smaller OTT players. And then, of course, we have the illegal stuff like Pirate Bay and Mega Upload and some other characters that tend to come and go. So consumers have already made that choice. They recognize they have to do something different. We built a platform for them that is essentially boxes, software, experience. The content itself, the linear, actually comes free to air. It comes from an antenna. So in a kit, the consumer receives this kit from Tim Brazil, and they plug an antenna into it, and they're getting all the free content that way. The guide, the electronic guide they see in the television is as if they've spent the money on a more expensive cable or satellite package. So the customer feels like they're getting good quality content, even though most of it's coming free to air. And they're getting 30 channels and Metropolitan Sao Paulo. That's enough. When they consider that football is part of that broadcast, they have a pretty good package. For everything else, they hit a button on the remote control that says Netflix, and they can watch that. There are some other local OTT vendors, such as TV Alphaville, which is one that was recently announced, that has a smaller set, very similar to what Dish's Sling service here in the United States is like, where the consumer pays direct back to those providers. But the operator themselves are not actually a content aggregator, to Mike's point. They themselves recognize it's all about customer engagement and getting them to commit to their broadband line. And for a major operator to come in right at the very beginning and to say that indicates that everybody in the industry recognizes there's a drastic shift in the way people are consuming things. Now it's about how do you aggregate in such a way to keep the customer engaged.
I think in that same vein, I don't know if any of you saw, Verizon's coming out with their OTT service, but they're also coming out with a mobile-only OTT service, as is AT&T. And ostensibly what they're doing is giving the pipe away for free and ad-supporting an app so that they can sort of go around the potential net neutrality repercussions. So it's sort of going back to the old, brought to you by this soap in the 1950s television style, where I think there's two conversations. Are you a content creator and publisher? Are you a channel? Or are you an operator that's trying to amass an audience and offer them something? And in the operator space, it's a competitive, cutthroat space, and they have the connection to the household. So I think it's actually a genius idea, and anyone in that space that's at the tier 1 operator level should probably do that. It creates more disruption, but it also hedges, again, I use the word hedge constantly, it's hedging their bets and capturing the Gen Z to millennial demographics, age 2 to, I don't even know where millennial stops. Is it 32? It's probably in their 20s. It's a long way from where I am. But in order to capture those future consumers, they're really current consumers, these large companies have to make these kinds of investments and innovations.
I'm actually pretty bullish on Netflix's sort of still remaining growth opportunities for a couple key reasons. One is, and this goes back to our very first point about talking about search and recommendations and bringing people to content they want. You don't have to nail it every time, actually, with discovery. You just have to be good enough. You don't have to find the perfect show for someone to watch. So research shows that 7 out of every 8 people, when they grab their remote control, don't know what they're going to watch. That means they're ripe for suggestion. And as long as you do a good enough job of finding something that entertains them, they're going to keep coming back to you over and over again. And Netflix does that really well, even though they're imperfect. And people have come to rely on it as, hey, I'm going to find something good to watch on Netflix, even if their library in many senses has a bunch of flaws. And so they don't have to keep investing and paying for all of the Hollywood content as opposed to their own, and then getting what Hollywood really wants them to have at this point. So they're going to be able to keep growing and manage costs that way. The other is, ironically, because they are segregated out from your cable bill, I think there's an opportunity to grab incremental entertainment money out of people's wallets. If they got bundled in with your Comcast bill, and to Candace's point earlier, which is approaching $200 for a lot of people are going to line item that and go, where can I save money? By keeping Netflix out and at a low sort of $10 a month price point, people just say, it's $10, whatever. Let me focus on the Comcast bill and how I can bring that down. And I think there's a lot of sort of mental opportunity to keep growing at the cost of other places where you spend your money.
You know, do we as consumers really need another place to buy the exact same piece of content? At some point, the pricing, margin reduction, gimmicks around trying to support it and subsidize it with ads, what have you. But you look at what Sony's rolling out and what we're seeing with over-the-top, you know, multi-channel linear packages that fundamentally look like cable but have less content in it than you would get from your cable operator. Do we as consumers need another well of exactly the same content? Probably not. But if it was sitting in front of you as a consumer and you had to make a choice, price is going to be pretty much flip a coin at some point. Then it comes down to what we're all talking about here, which is the user experience. How can I enable the consumption of this content in a way that means the most to me as a consumer? And I'll make my choice fundamentally in the next few years on that.
Right. And then the challenge there with these, I'll call it Sling TV-like services, like because of the windowing and what's on this, and this is on here, but not on Tuesdays, and this is on, that user interface challenge is like super complicated because you're mixing kind of the VOD with the broadcast, with the stream anywhere, but only no archiving, you know, like all that stuff is, and so my son has no idea about this. And so it's just like, okay, I want to find the thing, why isn't it on here? Well, it's not on here because it's not in the window, or it's not on here because it rolled out of rotation, or whatever it is. That's a weird experience for him when he's used to just going to YouTube and everything's always there. Right. Yeah.
And I think it's less about choice. I don't know about any of you, but I pay a lot of money across all of these services because of the nature of the business I think that we're all in, and I would not give up Spotify for anything. And that service to me is all about choice and experience. And so at the end of the day, for OTT video-related services, and you know, I have my feelings about where Spotify may go and where they can pivot and where they should pivot, and they probably are. I think if it becomes essential in your home, then it doesn't really matter what it costs.
Right. I mean, what's great about these subscription services is the paying for experimentation is zero, essentially. You can watch something on Netflix, you can watch, I probably wouldn't go to a VOD service and pay $4.99 to try out an experimental weird Italian film, because the chance it's gonna work for me after about 10 minutes is probably pretty low. But if I can like watch 3 or 4 in a row, I might find one, and it didn't cost me anything to do that. I'll watch 10 minutes, no. Watch now 5 minutes this one, that looks pretty good, maybe I'll watch that. So it's actually really great for deep content, and especially internet content, where the value equation is so broad, like from great to terrible. And so that's what's happened on Spotify, is that, I hate to say it, a lot of the small artists and a lot of the independent artists and a lot of the artists that aren't, you know, Beyonce, are getting a lot of plays because people are just, the cost to try it out is zero, versus in the good old days you have to buy a CD, it was $16 to try that artist out, and that was a pretty high barrier to, you better pick something you knew was going to be good. So I do feel that that's another side benefit for just allowing experimentation across a broader set of content.
Yeah. Candace, you called the OTT universe still something of a wild, wild west, and that's very accurate, because if you think about it, 5 years ago you mentioned Netflix to somebody and it was still, you know, yeah, I'll get a disc in the mail. They were just starting to veer off towards streaming. Let's take a look at 5 years in the future. What are we going to see out there? How big will Netflix be? Will there be a Netflix?
Yeah, I think.
Well, 5 years in the future, every device in the home, everything that you touch, from your fridge to your microwave, will be a smart device. Mm-hmm. And so the way in which we consume content, I think, will also pivot and evolve. I think it's going to be an amazing place. A lot of the noise that we're talking about, I think you said it earlier, a lot of those players will sunset just by natural attrition. And but yeah, I think it's an exciting time. But yeah, I think we're going to be consuming content in an ADD type of a fashion, more than we are on Twitter and Facebook now on our mobile devices. We'll be consuming content at a rate that's probably sort of scary and dangerous.
I'm going to actually disagree with that on
Yes!
multiple levels.
We'll make it, somebody wakes up in the audience. Someone
In that,
disagree.
5 years in this industry and in this world is a blink of an eye. And I don't think people and habits change that quickly. I think incredible majority of people are going to still be getting the bundles and still just be watching what's delivered to them. And the turnover rate of devices in your home, whether it's your fridge, your TV, et cetera, are so slow that it's going to take a long time to get that kind of adoption. Let's look at the DVR. So I was at TiVo back in the day, in late 90s, early 2000s, and it's largely considered one of, if not the most revolutionary entertainment device in our lifetimes. We're now 15 years into that, and we're barely at 50% penetration in people's homes in this country. It takes a long time for that kind of adoption to change. So in 5 years, I don't think it's going to look that much differently than it is today. It's going to evolve in slow steps, but evolution takes a while. And we're going to see some more people getting different kinds of bundles, but the big operators, the Comcast, the DirecTVs of the world, they're still going to dominate the landscape, and possibly even more. Because at the end of the day, people want things delivered to them in an easy way, and they can do it at the scale and the way nobody else can.
Or there'll be a massive consolidation, as there already is, and there'll only be 3 choices to get anything, internet or content.
Yeah, we talked a lot about search. In the old days of search, my original cable service, when I finally got it when I was like 9 years old, because I grew up on a farm, was changing the channels, right? That was search. Then eventually this revolutionary thing came along called the EPG, the Electronic Programming Guide. So I could find it all in one place by pressing a guide button. That came a little later, obviously, and that was search. That's about as good as it was. It's a pretty exciting time because we now have a lot of technology behind different ways of doing search and recommendations. So I think, 5 years from now, I think content will be easier to find, and I think more is going to be thrown at the consumer's face, whether it be mobile, on the primary screen, PC, tablet, what have you. I think the question is, will there be a link between all of those 3 worlds? Is it going to be consumers? Because if you talk to a 25-year-old today, they're just fine with their Galaxy 5S or iPhone 6 Plus. They're just fine to watch everything on that screen that's about this big. Now, in my 40s now, my eyes are still good, but eventually maybe that's not going to be good enough for me, and I'm going to want that bigger screen. But you're still going to have a huge generation of people behind us that are going to be fine with this. I think the success cases will be the ones that are able to link their content with what I call the 10-foot experience, which is the television. Because then you really have a nice viewing experience for the consumers long term. Connected home, I think there's legs to connected homes. I have to agree with that. However, I'm not sure about connected fridges because I was talking about that in the late 90s, and I was at 3Com when I was broadband spokesman there.
I just need the fridge to lock when I'm watching the Food Channel.
Exactly.
Get the lock thing working, that would be super.
Well, I'm always picturing
One last point. If you look at the exit of Nest and Dropcam, which were major acquisitions by Google, between the two, that's an aggregate of $2.5 billion in acquisition money for those two. Big players are taking connected home very seriously. What I'm not convinced of yet is if those are going to be points for access to content. Will there be a little TV on your fridge? Highly doubt it, but
It'll be a hologram.
What I would say, I think, is another big factor out there is content as a service. So I think that you guys are going to see some introductions of products in this next year from some large players where basically new, and they are connected television platforms, where basically the people are going to be able to build applications on top of the content. So that then the reality is the content flows into these applications, and people with new creative ideas will be able to build some really interesting stuff, pulling it together even from multiple competitive sources potentially into one continuous stream. So for example, imagine a future television set. When you turn it on, what comes on is the channel of you, and the channel of you is made up of all the things you have access to, regardless of source. And it's seamless, and you don't have to do anything, and you can thumbs up or thumbs down, the Pandora of television. And so I do think that people will have those kind of products. Hopefully that will make it easier to get more people to use these things, get up into the area where my parents can use it, because they're not really, sitting there with their tablet searching on YouTube yet. But something like that could really help I think, the industry. And then I think beyond that, the actual personalization of the content itself. Smart televisions can mix broadcast with internet seamlessly. And they can replace the ads, it can replace the content, it can change the content. So what you think you're seeing on Channel 7 was Channel 7, but now it's a stream from the internet and then back to Channel 7. And that's us being shown at NAB and other trade shows, and that stuff will start to roll out. Right now, most major smart connected televisions have the ability to do this today, and in fact, you guys probably don't know this, but the smart televisions are actually talking through the internet back to people with profiling information. All that kind of stuff is happening. Some of it, I hope, with being done safely, but the reality is you're going to see the personalized content stuff in a few years.
It's an interesting segue because content as a service actually is a product we announced last year of Ubiquity in partnership with Akamai, where since we not just aggregate content on behalf of distributors, we actually license the content, and the licenses that we have allow us to sub-license that content to distributors. And in some respects, you have a tremendous number of platform players up here, but all roads lead back to the content. So what we do in partnership with Akamai is house that on-demand content as well as the live channels that we service, and again, allow others who build the user experiences to tap into that content, or they can leverage one of ours as well. In terms of where the industry is going in 5 years, I think you're seeing the cracks in the hole, as someone described. I do see some rapid change occurring now. I meet with cable providers every day, and many of them tell me that they're considering getting out of the VOD business. So you're going to see further aggregation there. You're going to see the continued emergence of national cable brands. Dish started the fray, but Comcast is going to be a national brand here very quickly as well. And I think, as long as you have original content sources, which is why original programming is so huge, you're going to continue to have direct-to-consumer offerings, and they're going to further restrict their content to folks like Netflix to be able to tap into the consumer base directly. Those are some key changes I think I see.
Well, let me ask you, with the Comcast-Time Warner merger, with that going bye-bye, are there still concerns about a dominant internet service provider emerging to...
This morning it was Charter, Time Warner, so,
Yeah.
all right, so it's a different guy. But the reality is, what he's really saying at the end of the panel, I think is really important, because what you're really talking about is Comcast, the app, okay? So Comcast, the app, just goes on the internet, and they get off their cable, it just needs some internet connection, and they can run it anywhere. And so you'll start to see these guys go national with just app-based platforms, and in fact, international. Like Comcast has invested an enormous amount of money in this platform. There's probably guys in Canada that could use that platform. There's probably guys in Europe that could use that platform. And just all they need is internet connection, and they can put their own content in it, and they can customize it. They may not even say Comcast. But the reality is that kind of platform play is really going to change things in a big way.
I think you've probably heard the term, and it's been kicked around this conference and NAB and others, the term of core multi-channel services. And to that point, in the next 5 years, I think that core stays in place. The core may change, the way it's bundled, but there will be at its core in a subscriber's household, for the most part, some core aggregation of multi-channel linear as we know it today. What's getting interesting is what gets built around it by the service provider. How do you get your arms around and augment that core multi-channel with new interactive services, new OTT services? It goes back to the point, if you think about what a cable channel really is, it's nothing special. It's a playlist. It's a playlist of VOD that was assembled, chosen 9 months ago, and broadcast out of a playout facility. We now have the technologies getting in consumers' hands from set-top to phone, where that can be assembled on the fly at the client level and deeply personalized. So my Discovery linear channel is going to look different than yours based on what the platform knows about me, but it's still the same core set of library assets. They're just assembled at a different place, and they're more personalized and more relevant. So minutes of engagement go up. That helps everybody in the chain from a monetization standpoint. CPMs for advertising go up. I mean, there's a lot that's happening at the platform level that's going to change that. We went out to USC back in January, and we took a group of millennials who hate that term, by the way. Learned that the hard way.
Hey, you millennial.
So, what we all assume is that because content is being consumed on this and an iPad and on a laptop, is that that's the way the millennials want to consume it. What was really surprising when you dig under it is that that's not what they want. The first thing they do, they all told us, when they ran home for break to their parents' house, was get in front of the biggest piece of glass they could find in the house to watch TV. This was out of necessity, or out of they didn't have room in the dorm room, or out of cost. So we said, look, if we gave you $3,500, you could do whatever you wanted with in this industry, something related to consuming content, what would you spend the money on? Number one, I'd pay for 3 years worth of Netflix up front, okay? What do you do with the other $2,500, $3,000? Buy a television. So it was telling where there's some misconceptions of what millennials want and how they're consuming it compared to what was necessity and what was choice. And to your point, in 5 years, that's why I don't think you're going to see a lot of fundamental change to what we know as TV consumption today. We're just going to have more choices brought together in a different way.
Right, which
And
is
as
pretty
a
much been the
correlate-
history of television.
Yeah.
And as a corollary to that, we don't know how these teens and 20-somethings are going to be when they become 30-somethings and
Right.
40-somethings. When you're younger and you have more time than money, it's one thing to act in a certain way and either go to BitTorrent and deal with that pain or go search out stuff one by one. But as you start getting a job and having kids, and all of a sudden you've got more money than time, and you don't want to deal with all that, and you want things packaged up to you and delivered nicely to you, are they going to become their parents, as most people do, and just pay for the bundle? Or are we actually in the midst of a fundamental shift in how people discover and consume content? I don't know the answer. Nobody in this room knows the answer. You'd be too rich to be in this room. That's what we really are waiting to see is over the next 10 or 15 years, are we in the midst of a shift or not?
Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to have about 10 minutes for question and answers, and let me just throw out one closing question to everybody. If you could put your if you had to put your retirement savings into one company, which would it be? Amazon or Netflix?
I already put them into my own company. I haven't gotten any.
Good answer.
I was gonna
Amazon,
say-
without question, but that's much bigger than an entertainment answer. Amazon's going to own the world's retail, so that's where I'd put it.
Yeah, before you restricted your choice, I think I would have chose like a desalinization plant with the water issues we're having in California. But I think, yeah, Amazon is an amazing company. You know, it's interesting the trends or the ways in which I find my children watching content. Even though I have Amazon Prime, they're not at all interested in the video, but they love the fact that they know they can get any product in about 2 days for, you know, what they call free now. So. You know, Amazon is so diverse. They just started to release their, you know, the money they make on their web services business, and it's an amazing. That alone is an amazing business. It could be a standalone company. That could be a multi-billion-dollar company. So, the directions they'll head, I have no idea, but I'd have to pick Amazon as well. Yeah.
I agree.
I think we're all agreed.
You got a company that is expert and proven expert of connecting consumers who want something with the things that they want. Now, if that's video or it's a hard good, doesn't matter. I'd bet on them all day long.
Yeah.
Amazon is the only recommendation engine in my mind that truly works in all categories. It's very impressive what they've done. And I also agree with Amazon for a different reason. Their intellectual property sales, so which would include, when I say intellectual property, books, you know, music, video, all that stuff, that more than compensates for the loss that they make at retail, which they always have. And because you're betting your future in an equity, absolutely Amazon's the play, because I think Wall Street will continue to want to believe in that dream. I think it's going to keep going.
Well, I think Amazon also, with Amazon Prime, what they learned, you know, again, keeping it, you know, cheap and easy with the whole free shipping with the membership was brilliant, because I don't want to calculate shipping. Charge me more, but just give me free shipping and get it there in 2 days. So again, they made it simple, and what's cheaper than free? So I think they learned a lesson from.
Yeah, they're ubiquitous. You can get anything. I did Amazon Fresh. It's available in LA. I think it's $2.99 a month. I mean, $2.99 a month, $2.99 a year. And within a 50-minute window, when I was renovating my house, living on the 14th floor of an apartment building, they showed up. They were actually 1 minute late, maybe 2. So I emailed customer service. I ordered wine. I ordered a couple yoga mats. Those are expensive. A whole cadre of groceries. It was about a $400 bill, and they gave it to me for free. And so customer service. So I'm loyal for that reason alone.
Yeah, same here.
Amazon Fresh is too expensive, so I'm just
Okay.
Amazon Prime now.
Okay, do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
With YouTube being the dominant player in video, online video, do you think that they are stunting a lot of innovation in this space, and that they are not a profitable entity unto themselves? Is this something America might pursue, what EU is pursuing currently?
We'll see if Mr. Keeler's new startup can to keep them honest over there a little bit. But I think you will see some other folks that have some deep pockets try and compete in and around that space, and it may take some of the pressure off from, you know, any kind of antitrust suit. But it could get better for the consumer as well. We're all kind of hoping that it gets better for the content owners that are using that as a distribution vehicle, where they can actually get paid a reasonable amount because there's competition. We'll see. It seems to be firing up in that direction.
There are a number of startups around YouTube that are helping, you know, big content owners find ways to monetize, and even small content generators. You know, Broadband TV is a good example. There's a bunch of other guys just like that. There's, you know, 4 or 5 decent players. I think YouTube content originators and people that have had their stuff pirated, and then they're finding ways now to replace those fragments. I'm sure you know what they do with fragments, where they have algorithms where they'll find pirated content. They go back to the originator and say, as a service, and this is professional services organizations that do this, we'll find fragments, we'll comb your library, we'll match, we'll upload a clean version of what's been stolen, and then we're going to split the advertising revenue with you. And that seems to be a new model for YouTube. I think that's going to help the industry along, and I also think it's going to help those content originators, whether they be big studios or independents working out of a garage somewhere, also find an audience for their own things outside of YouTube. And maybe YouTube becomes the showpiece for their own services outside as it becomes easier to do this.
Gentleman in the back.
Would you think Amazon using their own hardware and trying to get
Kindle worked. Kindle was very successful, and it's Trojan horse. I think it'll work for them. You know, I'm in that business. A big part of our business is set-top boxes, and know what the costs are. And I don't think they're making money in those boxes on that hardware. And I'm only speculating. You know, but that being said, I think it's an effective Trojan horse technique, and I think it will get people in the living room. The question is, can they stay there with enough content?
Yeah, this is I hate the term, but it's used a lot. This is a battle for the start screen in the home. And if you look at what's out there with Roku and now Amazon Fire TV and now Android TV coming now, and the restrictions that even Google's putting on the Android TV platform, trying to sell it to MVPDs to use it, they own that start screen, and that's what it's all about. So not only is it Trojan horse, and that's clearly right, it's a battle for who gets that pixel in front of the customer first, and what they do with it over time, we'll see. But there's a lot of competition for that. I mean, you mentioned Apple, there's Roku, there's Android TV, there's more in the queue coming. And then, of course, you get the smart TV guys going, well, I'm the first one here, you don't need a box. So this battle's not done. And I think there's going to come a point where the content owners are going to say, enough. This is enough.
In the back there?
I think you answered your own question. And I don't mean that cheeky, but the market will decide what it wants, and those that are not part of that decision are going to go away. So I think right now where things are settling out, choice is good. Consumers aren't sure what they want. Getting this technology out there is great. It'll find level set in its own. I mean, there'll be a directional choice that'll be mass market. And either those that are powering that are going to survive, or they'll pivot and do something else, bring partners in. But you know, it's irritating right now, but it's probably a good thing. But it'll level itself out, in my opinion.
I really feel like the player who can create, I'll call it the best life bundle for you, which is what device, what services, what platforms. And Apple's in a pretty good position to do that. Amazon's in a pretty good position to do that. Netflix doesn't seem like they do my whole life. They need to do some other stuff. They better get a car. They better get something going on. So the reality is, you know, they seem fairly monodimensional, although very broadly distributed. So you know, the question is, if I'm going to, it kind of is trading the cable operator for some other subscription. And if it's Amazon Prime or Apple Care Plus, or whatever it's going to be in the future, we'll see how that battle goes.
It's what other value-added services that hardware manufacturer can provide. So Fire TV and Amazon, it's pretty clear. Apple, it's sort of transparently clear. And I think just giving the consumer, all of us, choice. I mean, how many different car manufacturers are there? I mean, I don't know that we need consolidation. If you look at the makeup of a family, maybe it's traditional family, you've got kids, a couple parents, typically the gaming console controls the media destiny of your family. So we do everything through the Xbox, everything. I can't, in this business, we build Xbox applications on a daily basis. I can't figure out how to navigate that thing. I personally don't like it, so I dumb down to the Apple TV or the Fire TV. So I think, again, it's all down to choice and competition.
Yeah. Okay, we have time for one more question. Yes.
Yeah, in general, I think from the music industry's lessons, becoming the loss leader for somebody else's business, like that's not the best place for content is, to be the loss leader for it. It's a little like being the milk provider for Walmart, you know, like, okay, I'm providing you milk so that you can sell $40 worth of other stuff to them when they come in. So it's hopefully somebody in the content realm that really cares about content can stay in the picture, and because that's what's required to actually make great content. We don't want everything to just go to the least common denominator.
Well, hopefully, to your point, I mean, because there are so many ecosystems, as the other gentleman mentioned, I think that gives us a little bit of hope that good content can find its way through to be successful to the consumer. You know, when there was only an Apple TV as the primary, you know, go to the store and buy it, we got it. Now we've got all these other devices that are out there that you can consume content on that are outside of these closed ecosystems, and there's distribution direct to consumer available to the content owner. The hope is, and we'll see, that there's going to be enough content that can get around those closed ecosystems and still reach the consumer in a way that the good content floats to the top.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and thank you, panelists. Big round of applause.
Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Can I do have a card on you?
Yeah.